Bonjour! And today I have prepared for you something extra juicy coming straight out of Japan's long history. If you've ever played Total War, Assassin's Creed games, or watched Japanese historical drama, and if the name Oda Nobunaga, Ranmaru, or Date Masamune tickle your little grey cells, then the words Sengoku Jidai probably aren't unknown to you. And if they are, the Sengoku period is the most famous and well-documented era of civil unrest and civil war in Japanese history. An entire century of bloodshed that saw the rise and fall of many figures of legends, where some of the largest and fiercest battles ever fought on Japanese soil took place. But it is also one of cultural renewal, with booming trade, population growth, as well as the arrival of Christianity and the European on the islands. What is a little less known, however, is how this period came to be. How could the Ashikaga Shogun, who ruled at the time, let their power collapse so thoroughly? Or did they become utterly unable to rein in the growing power of their vassals and retainers? Or did they become little more than figureheads and puppets in the hand of those same ambitious retainers and vassals? What set the stage for those warlords now to grow so powerful and independent from central seat of power in the first place? Or, in not so many words,
how did it come to this?
Thank you for your intervention, King Ferdinand, and now that we know why we are here...
Hey! I do have a question before we start. Why are you wearing sunglasses indoor? It's not the right place as far as I know.
That, Billy, is because I am a pilot episode.
Final History.
The Muromachi period, where Japan fell under the nominal dominion of the Ashikaga, lasted from 1336 to 1573, but in truth, the Ashikaga only held the reign of Japan for less than half of those 237 years. Before their ultimate banishment from the capital by Oda Nobunaga in 1573, the Ashikaga Shogunat had long since become mere figureheads at the hands of whoever held Kyoto at the time. Certainly they still held cultural leadership, don't get me wrong, but their ability to impose their political will on the various faction leaders and warship of the Sengoku period had long since faded away.
From its inception, the Ashikaga Shogunat, or Ashikaga Bakufu, had a problem compared to its predecessor: legitimacy. In a country dominated by warrior clans, it is the kind of thing that is rather important if you want to keep your hands on the reign of power, let alone your head.
Indeed, a majority of the clans that fell under the Ashikaga rule had been gifted their lands by the previous shogunate, the Kamakura. It resulted in the clan having fairly little loyalty and respect for the Ashikaga from the get-go. To remedy this situation, the Ashikaga continued their war against the Southern Imperial Court they had ousted from power in 1336, as they supported the Northern Court. They had installed themselves, obviously. One of their key objectives during this war was to take over the land of the various clans supporting the Southern Court and to use their power as shogun to redistribute those same lands amongst their own retainers, vassals and allies. In a way, they had hoped that doing this would make those same clans see the Ashikaga in a more positive light, garnering more loyalty and respect.
And at their height, the Ashikaga controlled roughly a quarter of Japan directly, which included strategical regions in the east and the center of Japan. The first allowing them control over many powerful warrior clans as well as the shogun seat, while the second allowing them direct oversight of the capital of Kyoto as well as the emperor. So for many lords, making an enemy of the Ashikaga was simply less convenient than simply bowing their heads, at least at first.
But by 1392, the Ashikaga Shogunat had emerged weakened from the conflict with the Southern Court despite their ultimate victory in the conflict. The war had proven costly in gold, food and men for the Ashikaga, and their policy of redistributing lands had by and large fallen through, as they had only done so sparingly as to avoid empowering too much their already far too powerful vassals and allies. and this lack of perceived recognition left a sour taste in the lord who had fought on the side of the Ashikaga in the Civil War. Worse, early on the shogun took the decision to move his court from its traditional seat in the Kanto region in the east of Japan to Kyoto in the center of Japan, roughly. This will prove to be a colossal blunder, as directly controlling the eastern part of Japan remained a necessity even after moving its capital to its new seat. Rich, populous, and center of the warrior culture at the time, it simply could not be ignored.
This led to the Ashikaga decision of splitting up the shogunate into a principal seat in Kyoto and a vice-shogunate in Kamakura. This secondary seat was under the hereditary control of a cadet branch of the Ashikaga and grew more and more independent from Kyoto over the course of the war with the southern court.
Whoa, there's like no way this isn't going to go horribly wrong at some point, right?
Well, Billy, you are correct, as the animosity between the two branches was absolutely rampant. The Ashikaga branch from Kamakura basically treated any kind of plot aiming at destabilizing the Kyoto branch of the family like a cat look at catnip. Despite this, the shogun weren't blind to the potential trouble that the estranged cadet branch could create, and were politically savvy enough to use the very vassals of said cadet branch against them to keep them from making too much trouble. Though that didn't stop a short-lived and quickly crushed rebellion in 1439, when the Kamakura branch had enough. But this infighting weakened the Ashikaga rulership even further, and slowly but surely, the also important eastern region slipped through the Ashikaga fingers. And unfortunately for them, their woes were far from over. They also had to keep in check the various warrior clans that kept them in power.
The shogun would appoint the leaders of the most powerful clans as military governors, or Shugo, a position that required them to reside most of the year within the boundary of the capital of Kyoto and the shogun seat. By keeping the Shugo close to the seat of power, the Ashikaga assured themselves of always having them at hand to curb their ambition. They have done so by carefully managing the Shugo, playing on their rivalry with each other to dismiss, punish, recompense and replace them as needed, to keep them from trying to have aspiration above their station.
A complex keep your friend close but your enemy closer game of musical chair that the Ashikaga literally could not afford to get wrong, especially as their own military might had slowly declined. In practice, the Shugo, removed from their own seat of power, had trouble governing their own lands, and the further away from Kyoto they were, the worse it was. This forced them to leave family members and underling clans to pick up the slack, while on the other side of the coin, as Shugo, they would be appointed as military governors of regions usually chosen to be strangely far away from their own clan holdings, and sometimes, just to keep things simple, not even one region, but multiples. For example, the Yamana clan, one of the first and principal allies of the rising Ashikaga, saw their clan leader become the Shugo of not just one region, but 5 by 1363. Even this number grew to 11 a short while later. Yes, I know I don't have enough fingers, no need to point it out. Though that did not stop the Yamana clan from trying a rebellion in 1392 at the very tail end of the war with the Southern Court. A rebellion they then promptly lost as well as much of their lands, prestige and power. Friendship is clearly not what it used to be, especially if your name is Ashikaga. This division of the Shugo power base also had another intended effect. It created a divide between the Shugo and the provinces they were appointed to. This was done with the idea of curbing possible power grabs, as the local authorities and villages would chafe against the Shugo rulership. It was a system that managed to work for a time, but through the 15th century and up to the start of the succession crisis of 1464, the Shugo increasingly found ways to circumvent the main hurdle of having to reside in Kyoto itself. usually by appointing a family members or a retainers as envoy in their name. This way at least they manage to secure their clan lands firmly under their control, and even become increasingly autonomous from the shogunate in the lead-up to the Onin War.
And as they grew more and more independent from central power, so too did they start to fight against each other again, the shogunate having increasingly fewer ability to stop those incidents over time, as their once large and numerous clans had slowly slipped away from their direct control, leaving them with fewer and fewer military assets to deal with increasingly unruly Shugo.
There was, however, an unintended effect in how the whole Shugo thing worked. While they had trouble finding their footing within their assigned provinces, so too did this detachment and division from central authority in the provinces slowly breed resentment and desire for independence within the local authorities and people, which, in addition to a growing divide between the mercantile classes and the city of Japan in general on one side, and the peasant from the countryside on the other, as the first grew ever richer through the early Muromachi period, while the second fell deeper and deeper into poverty, plus an increasingly crushing numbers of debt, regular bout of famines, as well as regular pandemic, while the number of peasant revolt, or do-iki, only kept growing and get worse over time.
Like the Socho uprising in the last month of 1428, crushed by the rising price of rice and taxes, and suffering in the midst of an epidemic of cholera, peasants from the Kinai region rebelled. They invaded and sacked merchant and money broker house as well as Buddhist temples to plunder, yes, but more importantly to find and destroy the debt ledger kept in those same places, the rebellion rapidly spreading to the Yamato, Kawachi and Harima provinces.
The rebels even occupied the Toji temple of Kyoto in November 1428 before their demands, the cancellation of debt, were ultimately met by the authorities.
Whoa, a medieval rebellion that managed to work. Amazing!
Indeed, Billy. Well, to be fair, not all of them found such success. But this should tell you just how much the situation within the countryside was growing out of control from the capital, the shogun and his Shugo. So to recap the situation as of now, we have a weak shogunate growing ever weaker, increasingly unruly Shugo that are increasingly independent from central power, and a countryside that is slowly but surely catching fire. Between you and me, what should we add to this very, very flammable mix to make sure things get extra spicy?
So I absolutely must present to you Ashikaga Yoshinori, the 6th shogun of the dynasty, who ruled from 1429 until his untimely death in 1441, whose death marked the definitive freefall of the Ashikaga political might. He was by all account a shrewd politician, which is very much the reason why he was ordered dead by Akamatsu Mitsusuke, an assassination carried out on the 24th of June 1441. The reason why is rather simple. Yoshinori had grown into the habit of using his own executive power as shogun in matters of and succession to meddle into the clan matters and choose candidate of his own personal liking as future heir and clan head. As for why this was such a problem beyond the obvious,
well, inheritance at the time was strictly regulated by, and really, pardon my French over all the Japanese names, because I do have an atrocious accent, the Soryosei. Oui, I know. Please don't mention it. So, as I was saying, the Soryosei, or Global Control System, originally dictated that succession must be divided between all descendants, sons and daughters, and in trying to fight off this succession that would divide their holdings over time and weakening them, the clans had adopted the principle of indivision, which implied that only a single heir take everything, leaving everyone else in the entire clan to survive on their whim.
This winner-take-all strategy evidently transformed every succession matter into a John Wick poker night. Every prospective heir had no bands, clique and faction congregating around them and ready to fight for them.
So now you can perfectly imagine that having a meddling Shugo poking his big nose into this kind of very, very volatile environment, and making it even worse, was not well received at all by the Shugo, or by anyone really.
And that is how we come to the head of the Akamatsu clan, Akamatsu Mitsusuke, who, feeling the headsman hacks coming for his clan, decided to take the initiative by offering Yoshinori a ticket for a one-way trip to the afterlife with no possibility of refund.
But this action ultimately did very little to stop the growing infighting within the Shugo own clans. In fact, and at this point I feel like a broken record, but it only gets worse. The infighting stretched the various clan resources thinner and thinner, forcing the Shugo to rely more and more on their own dependent vassals. Those same subordinates leaped at the occasion and over time started to accumulate substantial amount of power for themselves.
Like the Asakura clan, who took over control of the rich province of Echizen from their master the Shiba, before becoming so powerful they could impose their own puppet candidate as heir and later chief of the Shiba clan, although with the help of the powerful lord of the Yamana clan, Yamana Sozen, that we will see again soon.
And this is not an isolated case. The Shugo retainers are getting ideas, increasingly. So, if earlier in the video the Shugo seemed to be the main threat to the shogunate, they are, in fact, colossus with feet of clay. This is no longer a case of the Ashikaga sitting on a cause of wildfire ready to blow up. It is the entire upper class of the warrior clans that are increasingly looking like the French High Command of 1939. And trust me, but here in France we all know that particular thing turned up last time, and we all nearly spoke German.
So it begins.
After the death of his brother Yoshikatsu in 1443, it is Yoshimasa who takes the seat of shogun at the young age of 13. His reign saw a grand cultural renewal. It is under his rule that the tea ceremony and the art of floral arrangement were formalized, as well as the Noguk theater rising to prominence. Unfortunately, for as much as he was an enthusiast and patron of the finer things, he was an ineffective shogun when it came to politics.
The countryside, already reeled up after decades of small revolt, famine and sickness, fell further into misery and chaos, as usual at this point, with the Shugo run circle around him politically, as usual at this point also. And by the time Yoshimasa reached the ripe age of 29, he was so utterly fed up with the entire shogun thing that in 1464, and with no direct heir in sight, simply decided to dump the entire thing on his brother, Ashikaga Yoshimi. It was a rather smooth transition, all things told, right up until his wife, Ino Tomiko, birthed him a son in 1465, Ashikaga Yoshihisa.
Well, that's rather sudden.
You don't say!
So I guess that Yoshimasa ended up changing his heirs and everything was fine, right?
Why, we believe, and they even sung Kumbaya together around a big fire.
Oh, really?
No! Yoshihisa, barely out of his mother kicking and screaming, was evidently a perfectly fine candidate for the shogun's seat, so right out of the gate, factions started to rise around both him and Yoshimi. And that is, by the way, headless to whatever Yoshimasa had to say on the matter in the first place, because being a shogun evidently doesn't give you a voice.
For Yoshimi, one of the most powerful Shugo of the time, Hosokawa Katsumoto rose to become the leader of his faction. While on the other side, he was faced off by Yamana Sozen, yes, of the same Yamana clan that rebelled in 1392. They had, since the death of Yoshinori in 1441, regained their lost territory, prestige and power, by running circle around the following shoguns, mostly Yoshimasa.
Both men had already fought each other in the recent past over yet another inherent crisis in the Atakeyama clan this time. Without going further down that particular rabbit hole, otherwise we are going to be still here in next year, just picture that at the end of the day, the Atakeyama are going to fight on both sides of the war and everybody hate each other. Yeah, that's going to be fine. So for 3 years, the situation was tense in the capital, but under control, as both men refused to come to blow. Indeed, being the first to strike could mean censure from the emperor, which would make diplomacy very difficult. So with nothing better to do, they simply amassed their armies on either side of the city. At the start of the war in 1467, both sides boast of having over 80,000 men each staring at each other above the roof of Kyoto. Let's just take a second to contemplate this number. 160,000 men, mobilized over a period of 3 years, of course. Until this point, it is unprecedented in Japanese history, as most wars in Japan involve numbers in the low thousands or hundreds, and only exceptionally above the 10,000 mark. In fact, you'll need to go back all the way to the Mongol invasion 2 centuries prior to see similar numbers. And can you guess who is filling up the rank of those 2 armies?
I suppose there would be samurai there, no?
Well, samurai are certainly here, really, but they are not here in sufficient numbers compared to what is announced officially by both faction leaders. So, massive amount of Ashigaru. Those Ashigaru, or light-footed combatants, are, as the name implies, lightly armored and equipped, though they usually combat with spear and bow, and are massively recruited from the impoverished countryside, voluntarily, as people flee from debt and famine, or by force at spear point, when the recruits are not straight-up thugs and bandits wanting a go at pillaging a city or two after they fled from their own countryside. 160,000 men, a large part of which have every reason to despise richer city dwellers they see as crushing their family back home under debt and poverty. So when the war starts in 1467, both sides surge into the street of Kyoto, turning the once radiant capital of the empire into a medieval Japanese version of Stalingrad.
Every street, every house, every well, in the temple, in the palace, everywhere and everything is fought over. Everything not nailed on is stolen, then they come back for the nails, with the population flee the city en masse. Kyoto would burn multiple times. By the war's end, in 1477, the last combatants of the Onin War are fighting over a pile of rubble to be kings of the ashes.
Over the course of the war, both the Hosokawa and Yamana wove a web of alliance with the other Shugo that saw them arrive in Kyoto piecemeal with their own armies to reinforce either side, more often than not depleting their own clan and lands of their core fighting forces. By 1474, both Sozen and Katsumoto had died, probably of natural causes, leaving both factions leaderless and rulerless. And you remember the Atakeyama succession crisis from earlier? Well, both pretended hated each other enough that it was enough to keep the whole war going. This was no longer a succession crisis over who gets the shogun seat. It simply degenerated into settling score with your annoying neighbor, your second cousin, or that guy you really don't like his faces. But still, the combat did start to slow down over time, and not because one side started to win the war, no. In 1477, utterly spent and broken by years of sterile warfare, both sides just picked up their shit and went home.
You mean just like that?
We believe just like that. Over 320,000 men, again the number is probably exaggerated, fought in the longest and most violent war of its time for nothing. A war without clear winner. one that had even lost its initial objective with the death of their faction leaders in favor of just ducking it out. Nobody on either side boasted about anything from this war except the number of soldiers they had. No grand tale, no legendary warrior, no daring last stand. The war left an impression so bad, silence was better. It left no winner behind itself for sure, but it went home with a hell of a lot of losers. The Shugo, who had depleted their clan to go fight in the war, would more often than not deputize some of their own vassals as Shugo by interim, the Shugodai, which I should remind you is not a good idea, as it gave these vassals idea of their own. Those deputies would become difficult, if not straight up impossible to remove for the now weakened Shugo coming out of the Onin War. Those Shugodai, once vassals retained and trusted lieutenant, would in time come to be known as the Sengoku daimyo, supplanting their own masters, if not outright puppeting them. Not every Shugo on their clan would fall at the same speed, or at all of course, but their power would be utterly broken, never to be regained in full. As for the Ashikaga,
well, Yoshimasa, utterly done with the whole shebang, would actually stick to his guns, leaving the shogunate to his 9-year-old son in 1473, and want to live the remainder of his years in peace and tranquility, becoming a patron of the art and also building the Silver Pavilion in Kyoto. He died in 1490. As for his son Yoshihisa, he would die in 1487, without heir of his own, leaving the shogun seat to Yoshitane, the son of Yoshimi. He left behind a shogunate empty of any real political power, nothing more than a puppet dancing on the whim of whoever held Kyoto at the time.
the air of rebellion that swelled over Japan during the Muromachi period didn't stop with the end of the Onin War. No, bereft of any opposition thanks to the Shugo having been effectively neutered by the war, rebellions sprouted everywhere in Japan.
And in some areas, the peasant rebellion, Do-iki, and the religious rebellion, Iko-iki, are actually managing to take control of entire region, becoming de facto autonomous principalities, reveling in power and prestige with the various warlords themselves. Everything is now in place for a century of bloodshed.
And that is how the Sengoku Jidai came to be, by having the entire upper class of warrior clans, the Shugo and the Shogunate family, slowly cooking themselves over the fire for a century, and, realizing it wasn't fast enough, deciding to commit political seppuku on a scale never seen before in Japanese history. This vacuum was rapidly filled by all kinds of new power that became in effect independent kingdoms, daimyo warlords, kings in all but names, priests that ruled theological principalities, villages organizing themselves into communes, a new era of chaos.
An era when a peasant could become shogun.
But that, my dear Baguette, is another story for another time.
So, we'll see each other again soon.
Of course, Billy, we will. We will see each other again soon. Sur ce, mesdames et messieurs, I say to you au revoir, and don't forget to tickle your little grey cells.
Final History.
Ouais, c'est pas trop mal en fait de juste finir comme ça.